do you attribute your confidence as a filmmaker to being more comfortable with RP, or do you contribute it to just having more experience now directing?
A couple things came up for me. The first thing is I remember I was on set of Little Brother, and I was sitting and having lunch with one of the lead actors who's in it. His name's Daniel Deemer. And this idea of like the future, you know, how much will I see? I spent a lot of that first year, like trying to figure out how I would do it if I went totally blind. So I just jumped ahead and I was like, how would I do it? This seems impossible. This doesn't make sense to me. And we were eating lunch and I was telling him like, maybe I could do this, maybe I could do that. And, you know, I even had a certain amount of confidence about it because there was just something in me, like it's spiritually in me that I'm like, fuck it, I will figure it out. Like there's a doggedness in me. I don't know where it comes from. You got that dog in you. I have a theory that it's because I'm half Irish and half Korean, and both of those countries were like colonized and exploited, and they're both kind of rebel nations, and they're just like, they fight. They're fighters. But
I like that.
He basically kind of politely interrupted me and he said, Sheridan, you're not blind yet. Like he kind of, and when he used the term blind, he meant totally blind.
Yeah.
He said, this is all well and good, Sheridan, but you're not even there yet. And then it all kind of hit me. I looked around. I was like, I could see his face. I could see the hotel we were at. I was like, oh, he's right. And so part of the journey is, I'll be honest, it's a bit of a mind fuck, but the balance you have to find is you have to acknowledge the future and know that where you're headed is not a dark and scary place. And that comes back to what you said about internalized ableism. We, even as low vision people, say, oh, you know, being totally blind, that must be so scary. That's suffering. You know, it's one thing to be legally blind, but to be totally blind. Whereas like you hear this in the low vision blind community all the time. There are people who have, I heard this on a podcast the other day, somebody who has like barely any light perception. They can maybe make out like windows and doors. And even that, to me, that's scary to be at that level of acuity, because I still have 20/20 vision and stuff. But they were like, oh, but I know people who are totally blind and that's scary. And I was like, oh, you guys seem like you're in the same boat. So you have to acknowledge that the future is not as bad as you think, but you also have to maintain a level of mindfulness and presentness.
Yeah.
You have to just say, my feet are on the ground. Here's where I am. And I think that weirdly enough, the first year of Little Brother was the hardest period because it was all about the future. It was all about, this makes no sense to me. This is incomprehensible. This is unfathomable. This is terrifying. And it was like, it's almost like if you like watching like Train Spotting, like the heroin withdrawals that he goes through. It's like, that's internalized ableism leaving your body. It's like really intense, because for 30 years, I was taught that blindness is the end. Blindness is darkness. Blindness is terrifying, you know? And so, yeah, it's to answer your question, I think nowadays it's, and you might agree with this contradiction, even though my vision has changed, not much, but some, even though I have less vision, I have more confidence, you know, because I've lived with it for longer, because I know these things, because I've met a lot of disabled people who are doing amazing things, who inspire me, who say, you know, I climbed Mount Everest and I'm blind, or I don't have any limbs and I did this. And there are all these like people out there who are doing things that challenge these preconceived ideas. And so I just see myself in that lineage, is like, oh, here I am challenging these, you know, preconceived ideas about sight and vision and filmmaking and all these things.
No, that's awesome. Yeah. And I believe that too. And I think the more your career progresses, just from an outsider and getting to know you a little bit, I don't see that slowing down at all. I don't see you at any point being like, I can't do it anymore. I've lost too much vision.
Well, there are, as you know, there are stages of grief. There are periods where something changes and you have to adapt to that change. I'm honestly just coming out of one. I came back. I was shooting in London or not shooting, but I was editing in London for 6 weeks, and I got back and I'd been so preoccupied with it that my vision changed. I didn't notice. It all kind of hit me at once, and it was a bit overwhelming. But it has something to do with that idea of like, where am I headed? You know, there's a great little New York Times piece that my friend Will Butler, I don't know if you know Will Butler, wrote. He's blind, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he basically like challenges the word going blind. And he says that going blind is like similar to saying going crazy. It's like, it sounds negative.
Yeah.
So he's like, I'm not going blind. I'm not going to this place of, you know, despair. I'm arriving at blindness, you know? And so I think about that as like, am I being pulled away from everything I love, or am I just transforming, and how I interact with the world and how I interact with how I create art is just transforming, you know? If I can see it in that way, which isn't always easy, then, you know, I'm fine.
Yeah. No, that's great to share. In the grief of all that, I feel like is needed. It's just a necessary part of it.
Absolutely.
It's nice to get out of it and to kind of feel like, oh, I can breathe a little bit. You know, I feel better about things. And then with a degenerative eye condition, you'll have to have those moments where you realize, oh, something changed. But I feel like the skills we pick up along the way hopefully will shorten those grief periods, you know, and we'll have more tools at our disposal to kind of help us get through those phases, you know?
Yeah.